The boss's daughter froze when she saw her missing sister's bracelet on the nanny's wrist. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the Hale mansion's manicured gardens, painting everything in shades of amber and gold. Inside, the silence was thick, almost suffocating, the kind of quiet that comes from years of unspoken grief weighing down on marble floors and crystal chandeliers. Emily Hale walked slowly through the main corridor, her fingertips absently trailing along the cool wall. At 25, she'd grown used to the emptiness of this house, but she'd never quite made peace with it. Her other hand went to her wrist, like it always did when her mind wandered to dark places. She touched the delicate silver bracelet, 3 tiny interlocking hearts with the letter S engraved in the center. 20 years, God. Had it really been 20 years? She paused by the tall window overlooking the east garden, the same garden where balloons had once floated and children had laughed, the same garden where everything changed. Emily, her father's voice echoed from downstairs. Could you come down, please? Jonathan Hale stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, his posture as rigid as ever. At 49, he carried himself like a man who'd built an empire, which he had, but Emily knew better. Beneath that expensive suit and commanding presence was a father who'd never stopped searching, never stopped looking at strangers' faces hoping to find the one that had vanished. The new babysitter is here, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I'd like you to meet her. Emily descended the stairs, each step echoing in the vast foyer. Another babysitter. They'd gone through so many over the years, trying to find someone suitable for Olivia. Her 5-year-old half-sister. The little girl was shy, withdrawn, much like Emily had been at that age, after their mother left, unable to handle Jonathan's emotional distance. Olivia had retreated further into herself. I really think this one will work out, Jonathan continued, and Emily caught something unusual in his voice. Hope, maybe, or just exhaustion dressed up as optimism. She rounded the corner into the sitting room and stopped dead. The young woman standing by the window turned around with a warm smile. She was about Emily's age. Dressed simply in jeans and a cream-colored sweater, her long brown hair fell past her shoulders, and there was something gentle in her eyes, a kindness that seemed genuine, not rehearsed. Hi, the woman said, extending her hand. I'm Lucy. Well, just Lucy, I guess. She laughed softly, a bit nervously. Never had much use for a last name growing up, but Emily wasn't looking at her face anymore. Her eyes had locked onto Lucy's left wrist. The world tilted. The air rushed out of Emily's lungs. Her vision blurred at the edges as her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. There, catching the light from the window, was a bracelet. Silver, delicate, 3 interlocking hearts, and in the center, the letter S, identical. It was identical. Emily's hand flew to her own wrist, touching her bracelet as if to confirm it was still there, that she wasn't hallucinating. The room spun. She grabbed the back of a nearby chair to steady herself. Emily, Jonathan's voice sounded distant. Underwater. Are you all right? She forced herself to breathe, to focus. Her eyes moved from the bracelet to Lucy's face, searching for, what? Recognition. Some sign that this was a cruel joke. But Lucy just looked concerned, her smile fading into worry. I'm sorry, Emily managed, her voice coming out rough and strange. Your bracelet. Lucy glanced down at her wrist, then back up with a confused expression. Oh, this. She touched it fondly, the same way Emily always touched hers. Yeah, it's pretty much the only thing I have from before. The word barely made it past Emily's lips. Before Mrs. Eleanor found me. Lucy's voice was soft, almost apologetic, like she was used to this part of her story making people uncomfortable. I was about 5, I think. She found me on the steps of a church in Brooklyn, just sitting there crying. I was wearing this bracelet. That's it. No note, no explanation. Just me and this piece of jewelry. The floor seemed to drop away beneath Emily's feet. Jonathan had gone completely still. His face, usually so controlled and unreadable, had drained of all color. He took a step forward, then stopped, as if his legs had forgotten how to work. When? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. When did she find you? Lucy looked between them, clearly picking up on the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. October 15th, 2005. Mrs. Eleanor always remembered the date because... No. The word came out of Jonathan like a gunshot. He stumbled backward, reaching for the wall. No. That's not possible. Emily watched her father. This man who never showed emotion, who'd built walls so high around himself that nobody could scale them. She watched him crumble. Dad, she moved toward him, but he held up a hand. His eyes were fixed on Lucy's bracelet, and Emily saw something she hadn't seen in 20 years. Tears. Actual tears forming in Jonathan Hale's eyes. I only had 2 made, he whispered, more to himself than to them. Only 2. For my daughters, for their 5th birthday. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucy stood frozen, her hand still on her bracelet, confusion written all over her face. Emily felt like she was watching the scene from outside her own body, unable to process what was happening. October 15th, 2005. The date burned in Emily's memory like a brand. It was the day of their birthday party, the day the gardens had been full of balloons and laughter and music, the day her twin sister, Sophia, had disappeared without a trace, the day their world had ended, and here stood a young woman, the same age Emily would have been when Sophia was taken. Wearing an impossible bracelet found on the exact same day, Emily's knees gave out. She sank into the chair she'd been gripping, her entire body trembling. I don't understand, Lucy said, her voice small and frightened. What's going on? What does this mean? Jonathan finally looked up, and the expression on his face was something Emily had never seen before. It was raw and broken, and desperately, achingly hopeful. Sophia, he breathed, the name he hadn't spoken aloud in years falling from his lips like a prayer. My baby girl. Sophia had a bracelet just like that. Exactly like that. Lucy's hand dropped from her wrist. Her eyes went wide. You're saying... She looked at Emily, at her bracelet, then back at Jonathan. You think I'm... Nobody finished the sentence. Nobody had to. The late afternoon sun continued to pour through the windows, indifferent to the earthquake happening in that room. Somewhere in the house Olivia was playing, unaware that the foundation of everything was shifting beneath them. Emily stared at Lucy, really stared at her now. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw, the way she stood with her weight slightly on her left foot, just like Emily did, just like Sophia used to. Oh my God, Emily whispered, and in that moment, 20 years of silence shattered into a million pieces. The next morning arrived with a fog that clung to the mansion's windows like breath on glass. Emily hadn't slept. How could she? Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that bracelet, 3 hearts intertwined, mocking her with their impossible existence. She sat at the kitchen island, staring at her untouched coffee as it grew cold. The house staff moved around her quietly, sensing something had shifted. They always knew when the Hale family was unraveling. It happened in the silences, in the way Jonathan's footsteps grew heavier, in the way Emily stopped pretending to smile. Lucy had stayed in the guest house last night. Jonathan insisted. Just until we figure this out, he'd said, though his voice carried a tremor Emily had never heard before. Fear, maybe, or hope. She couldn't tell which was worse. Now Lucy sat across from her, hands wrapped around her own mug, looking just as exhausted. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and Emily wondered if she'd slept any better. I keep thinking I should probably just go, Lucy said quietly, breaking the silence. This is clearly... this is a lot for you guys. Don't. The word came out sharper than Emily intended. She softened her tone. Please just tell me everything, from the beginning. Lucy took a shaky breath. There's not much to tell. Honestly, Mrs. Eleanor, that's the woman who raised me. She found me on those church steps 20 years ago, October 15th, like I said yesterday. She waited for hours, thinking someone would come back for me. Nobody did. She didn't call the police. She was different back then, I think. Scared of authorities, maybe? I don't know. Lucy traced the rim of her mug with one finger. She was a widow, living alone in this tiny apartment in Brooklyn. She'd lost her own daughter years before, stillborn. When she saw me sitting there crying, Lucy's voice cracked. She said it felt like a gift, like maybe God was giving her a second chance. Emily's throat tightened. What do you remember from before? Nothing concrete, just fragments. Lucy closed her eyes. Sometimes I have these dreams. There's music and balloons everywhere. Red and gold balloons. And I'm running through a garden, laughing. Someone's chasing me, but in a fun way, like a game. She opened her eyes, and they were glistening. And then there's just nothing, like someone turned off the lights. Red and gold, those had been the party colors. Emily's hand went to her bracelet again, that unconscious gesture she'd developed over the years. Mrs. Eleanor tried to give me a normal childhood, Lucy continued. We didn't have much money. She worked as a seamstress, took in alterations and repairs. I helped when I got older. We lived in a neighborhood where people didn't ask too many questions about where you came from. They just accepted you were there. Is she still alive? Yeah, but she's not well. Dementia's been taking her piece by piece for the last few years. Lucy's voice dropped to barely a whisper. Some days she doesn't even remember my name. Footsteps on the stairs made them both look up. Jonathan appeared, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. His usually impeccable appearance was rumpled. Shirt wrinkled, tie hanging loose around his neck, like he'd started to put it on, then forgot why. I've made some calls, he said without preamble, pouring himself coffee with shaking hands. A private investigator, someone discreet. Dad, I need to know. He set the coffee pot down harder than necessary. I need to know if... He couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Emily watched her father's hands tremble as he lifted his mug. This man who'd built a business empire through sheer force of will, who'd negotiated million-dollar deals without flinching, he was coming apart at the seams over a bracelet and a young woman's story. I understand, Lucy said softly. If I were you, I'd need answers too. Jonathan looked at her then, really looked at her, and Emily saw his eyes scan Lucy's face the same way she'd been doing all night, searching for echoes of the little girl he'd lost. You look like her, he said, his voice breaking. Around the eyes, the way you tilt your head when you're thinking. Sophia used to do that. Lucy touched her face self-consciously. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything yet. Jonathan straightened his shoulders, pulling himself together through visible effort. Let's take this one step at a time. But even as he said it, Emily could see the war happening behind his eyes. The part of him that wanted to believe, wrestling with the part that couldn't survive another disappointment. Through the kitchen window, Emily caught sight of Olivia in the garden, her small figure darting between the hedges. She'd probably slipped out early, like she often did, preferring the company of flowers to people. I should go check on her, Lucy said, following Emily's gaze. That's why I'm here, right? To take care of Olivia. The question hung in the air, heavy with new meaning. Was that why she was here? Or was there something else at play? Some force of fate or coincidence that had brought her back to this house after 20 years? Emily watched Lucy stand and head toward the garden door. The morning light caught her profile, and for just a moment, one breathtaking, heart-stopping moment, Emily saw Sophia, not as she'd been at 5, but as she might have grown to be. The same height, the same graceful way of moving, the same unconscious habit of pushing hair behind her left ear. I'm going crazy, Emily whispered once Lucy was outside. You're not. Jonathan sat down heavily beside her. I see it too. They sat in silence, watching through the window as Lucy approached Olivia. The little girl looked up, surprised at first, then slowly smiled, something she rarely did. Within minutes, they were sitting together in the grass, Lucy saying something that made Olivia laugh. She's good with her, Emily observed. Yeah. Jonathan's voice was thick. Sophia was always good with babies, too. When our neighbor had twins, Sophia would spend hours just watching them sleep. She said she was guarding them, keeping them safe. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Sophia, who'd wanted to protect others, had disappeared before anyone could protect her. From her position near the doorway to the kitchen, partially hidden by the wall, Rachel Monroe watched the scene unfold with narrowed eyes. She'd arrived early for a supposed business meeting with Jonathan, but that wasn't why she was really here. She'd heard the whispers from the staff, something about the new babysitter, something about a bracelet. Rachel's fingers tightened around her Louis Vuitton clutch as she watched Jonathan's face. The way he looked at that girl in the garden with an expression she'd never seen before. Not in all their years together, through business deals and late nights and shared secrets. Hope, raw, desperate, dangerous hope. Rachel's emerald ring caught the light as her hand clenched into a fist. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to watch it all slip away because some nobody showed up wearing a piece of jewelry. 20 years, she'd thought. 20 years would be enough, apparently. She'd been wrong. Turning on her designer heels, Rachel walked back toward the foyer, her mind already spinning. She needed information. She needed leverage. And she needed to make sure that whatever was happening here, whatever threat this Lucy posed, was dealt with quickly and quietly. Some secrets, after all, were meant to stay buried. 3 days had passed since Lucy's arrival, and the mansion felt like it was holding its breath. Emily found herself doing things she knew were borderline obsessive, watching Lucy from doorways, studying the way she laughed, cataloging every gesture and expression. She couldn't help it. It was like looking at a ghost that had suddenly become flesh and blood. The private investigator Jonathan hired was a man named Marcus Webb, late 50s with the kind of face that had seen too much and forgotten how to be surprised. He'd set up a temporary office in Jonathan's study, spreading documents and photographs across the mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle he was determined to solve. "Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins," Marcus said, tapping a photo of an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled into a bun. "Lived in Brooklyn for 43 years, widowed in 1998, no children of her own. Well, officially no children. Worked as a seamstress until her health declined about 6 years ago." Jonathan leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on his nose. And she's clean. No criminal record, no suspicious financial activity around the time Lucy showed up." Marcus flipped through more papers. "But here's what's interesting. In October 2005, right around the time she supposedly found Lucy, there was a single cash deposit into her account. $5,000. Emily's breath caught. Someone paid her. Maybe. Or maybe it was a coincidence. An inheritance. A lucky lottery ticket. I'm still digging. Marcus pulled out another document. The church where she claims to have found Lucy was St. Mary's in Brooklyn. I spoke to the current pastor. Different guy than who was there in 2005. He checked their records. No reports of an abandoned child that day. Nothing. So she never reported it. Jonathan said quietly. "Looks that way." Emily stood and walked to the window. Outside, Lucy was pushing Olivia on the swing set, both of them laughing. The sound drifted through the glass, and it struck Emily how long it had been since she'd heard genuine laughter in these gardens. "What about Sophia's case?" she asked without turning around. "The original investigation. I've requested the files from the Connecticut State Police," Marcus said. "Should have them by tomorrow. I'm also reaching out to some of the detectives who worked it originally. See if they remember anything that didn't make it into the reports." Jonathan removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. He looked exhausted. "We need to be careful here. If word gets out that we think we've found her, the media circus would be insane," Marcus finished. "I know. Everything I'm doing is off the books. Discreet inquiries only." After Marcus left, Emily found her father still sitting at his desk, staring at a photograph he'd pulled from a drawer. She recognized it immediately. The last photo ever taken of Sophia, snapped just hours before she disappeared. A little girl in a red party dress, gap-toothed smile, holding a balloon. "I used to look at this every day," Jonathan said softly. "For years. Then I had to stop because it was destroying me. I put it away and told myself I'd only take it out when..." He trailed off. "When you found her," Emily finished. He nodded. "I never stopped looking, you know. Every face in a crowd. Every brown-haired girl about the right age. I'd see them and think, what if? Every single time." Emily had never heard her father talk like this. He'd always kept his grief locked up tight, buried under work and stoicism. Seeing him this vulnerable was unsettling. What if it's really her dad? What if Lucy is Sophia? "Then I get my daughter back," he whispered. "And I have to live with the fact that she grew up in poverty while I had everything. That some stranger raised her while I slept in this house every night. That she doesn't know me, doesn't remember me, doesn't..." His voice broke. Emily moved to his side and put her hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment. Father and daughter, united in hope and fear. Across town, Rachel Monroe sat in her penthouse apartment, swirling a glass of Merlot and staring at her laptop screen. She'd spent the last few hours doing her own digging, using resources and connections. Jonathan didn't know she had. The problem with being someone's business partner for 15 years was that you learned all their secrets. You knew their passwords, their security questions, their weaknesses. Rachel had made it her business to know everything about Jonathan Hale, including the one thing he'd never fully gotten over. She pulled up the old news articles about Sophia's disappearance. The media had gone wild with it at the time. Wealthy family, mysterious vanishing, no ransom demand. It had all the elements of a thriller. For months, Sophia's face had been everywhere. Rachel remembered that time clearly. She'd been Jonathan's protégé then, brilliant and ambitious, working her way up from junior associate to partner. She'd stood by him through the worst of it, managing the business while he fell apart. She'd held the company together through sheer force of will, and he'd never truly appreciated it. Never saw her as anything more than a colleague, no matter how many late nights they'd worked together, no matter how many times she'd saved his ass. Then he'd married again, had another daughter, tried to play happy family, and Rachel had watched from the sidelines, realizing she'd never be more than what she was, useful, but ultimately expendable. Her phone buzzed, a text from her private investigator. Yes, she had her own. The message was brief. Found something. Call me. Rachel dialed immediately. Mrs. Monroe. The voice on the other end said, I've been looking into this Lucy person like you asked. No last name. Raised by an Eleanor Jenkins in Brooklyn. Here's the thing. I found the church where she was supposedly abandoned. And I talked to some people in the neighborhood who've been there forever. One of them, old guy who runs a bodega near St. Mary's. He remembers that day, October 15th, 2005. He says he saw a woman in an expensive car pull up to the church early that morning. She was carrying something. Rachel's pulse quickened. Did he see what? A child, wrapped in a blanket. The line went quiet for a moment. There's more, the investigator continued. He said the woman was well-dressed, designer clothes, and she was wearing a distinctive ring, emerald, he thinks. Said it caught the light when she opened the car door. Rachel looked down at her own hand, at the emerald ring she'd worn for 20 years, a gift to herself when she'd made her first million. Find out everything you can about Eleanor Jenkins, Rachel said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Medical records, financial records, everything. I don't care what it costs. Yes, ma'am. She ended the call and took a long drink of wine. Her mind was already 3 steps ahead, calculating risks and options. If Lucy really was Sophia, if that bracelet meant what Jonathan thought it meant, then everything Rachel had worked for was at risk. The company, her position, her future. But more than that, if anyone started digging too deep into how Sophia had ended up at that church, Rachel's reflection stared back at her from the darkened window, and for a moment, she barely recognized herself. When had she become this person? When had ambition curdled into something darker? She knew the answer. It had been gradual, a series of small choices that added up to something monstrous. And the worst part? She'd do it all again, because some things, once done, couldn't be undone. You could only move forward and make sure the truth stayed buried where you'd left it. Rachel pulled out her phone again and composed a text to Jonathan. We need to talk about the babysitter. I have concerns. She hit send and smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Let the games begin. Jonathan found Lucy in the library that afternoon, curled up in one of the leather chairs with a book. Olivia was napping upstairs, and the house had fallen into that peculiar quiet that only old mansions could achieve. Not peaceful, exactly, but heavy with waiting. Lucy, he said softly, not wanting to startle her. Do you have a minute? She looked up, marking her place with a finger. Of course. He sat down across from her, and for a moment, he just looked at her, really looked. The slope of her nose, the arch of her eyebrows, the way her hair fell across her shoulders. So many small things that reminded him of, I need to ask you something, he began, choosing his words carefully. and I need you to know that I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm a father who lost his daughter 20 years ago, and I need to know the truth." Lucy set the book aside, giving him her full attention. "Okay, I'd like to do a DNA test, you and me." He held up a hand before she could respond. "I know how this sounds. Like I'm some paranoid rich guy who thinks everyone's out to scam him. But that bracelet, those bracelets, I had them custom made. There were only two. One for Emily, one for Sophia. I watched the jeweler create them, and I know for a fact that no one else could have replicated them. They're unique." Lucy's hand went to her wrist, touching the silver hearts like they might give her answers. "You think I'm her? Your daughter?" "I don't know what to think," Jonathan admitted, his voice raw. "But I need to know, one way or another. I need to know." The silence stretched between them. Outside, birds were singing, oblivious to the moment unfolding in the library. "What if I am?" Lucy asked quietly. "What if the test says yes? What then?" Jonathan hadn't expected the question, and he found himself without an easy answer. What then, indeed? How did you recover 20 years? How did you explain to someone that they'd been stolen from their family, that they'd lived an entire life that should have been different? "Then we figure it out," he said finally. "Together, as a family. And if I'm not, then," he swallowed hard. Then at least I'll know, and you'll have helped an old man find some peace." Lucy studied his face for a long moment. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "Okay, let's do it." The DNA collection was quick and clinical. A medical technician came to the house. Marcus had arranged for complete discretion, and swabbed both their cheeks. The whole process took less than 10 minutes. But those 10 minutes felt like hours. "Results in 72 hours, the technician said, packing up her kit. "I'll call Mr. Webb directly." After she left, Lucy excused herself and went up to her room in the guest house. Emily, who'd been hovering in the hallway, caught her father's eye. 3 days, she said. 3 days, he repeated. They felt like an eternity. That night, Rachel's text was still unanswered on Jonathan's phone. He'd seen it, read it, and deliberately chosen not to respond. Whatever concerns Rachel had about Lucy could wait. He had bigger things to worry about. But Rachel wasn't the type to wait. She showed up at the mansion the next morning, letting herself in with the key she'd never returned from when she used to stay over during late work sessions. The staff knew her, didn't question her presence. She'd been part of the furniture here for years. She found Emily in the breakfast room, picking at a croissant. "Emily, darling," Rachel said, sliding into a chair with practiced elegance. "We need to talk." Emily looked up, surprised. "Rachel, I didn't know you were coming by." "Your father's been avoiding me." Rachel poured herself coffee from the carafe. "Which is unlike him. We've always been able to talk about difficult things. Things are complicated right now. Because of the babysitter, it wasn't a question." Rachel leaned forward, her expression carefully concerned. "Emily, I need you to think about this rationally. A young woman shows up out of nowhere, wearing a convenient piece of jewelry, telling a convenient story, right when your father is at his most vulnerable. She's not scamming anyone," Emily interrupted, surprised by the sharpness in her own voice. "How do you know?" Rachel's tone was gentle, almost pitying. "Sweetheart, I've been in business long enough to recognize a play when I see one. Your father is a wealthy man. Word gets around. Someone could easily have researched your family history, found out about Sophia. The bracelet is real. Dad confirmed it. Bracelets can be copied, especially if someone knew what to look for." Emily set down her coffee cup harder than she intended. "Why are you doing this?" "Doing what?" "Trying to turn me against her. Against the possibility that she might actually be my sister." Rachel sat back, her expression unreadable. "I'm trying to protect you, and your father. I've stood by him through the worst moments of his life. I held this family's business together when he couldn't function. I've earned the right to voice my concerns." The unspoken words hung in the air. "And where were you?" Emily felt the barb land, even though Rachel hadn't said it out loud. It was true. Rachel had been there during the dark years when Emily had been too young to help. When Jonathan had been falling apart, Rachel had been the one to step up. But that didn't give her the right to poison this hope before they even knew if it was real. There's a DNA test, Emily said quietly. We'll know in a couple days. Something flickered across Rachel's face. Too fast to read, but Emily caught it. Fear. Anger. A DNA test, Rachel repeated. Well, that's thorough. It was Dad's idea, Lucy agreed. Of course she did. Rachel stood, smoothing her designer skirt. She'd be a fool not to, even if it comes back negative. She's already wormed her way in here, already got you hoping. You should go, Emily said, standing as well. And maybe don't come back until you can be supportive instead of whatever this is. Rachel's eyes hardened for just a moment, before her mask of concern slipped back into place. I'm trying to help, Emily. One day you'll understand that. She left without another word, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. Emily sank back into her chair, her hands shaking. She'd never stood up to Rachel like that before. Rachel had always been this fixed presence in their lives. Confident, capable, untouchable. But there'd been something in her eyes just now. Something that looked a lot like desperation. Upstairs in the guest house, Lucy sat on her bed, staring at the bracelet on her wrist. She'd taken it off for the first time in years, studying it closely. 3 hearts intertwined. The letter S. She'd always assumed the S stood for something personal to whoever had left her at that church. A name, maybe. A word. She'd spent hours as a child imagining what it could mean. Safe. Special. Saved. Never once had she imagined it might stand for Sophia. Her phone rang. Mrs. Eleanor's nurse at the care facility. Lucy, you should come soon. She's having a good day, but the nurse didn't need to finish. They both knew Mrs. Eleanor's good days were becoming fewer and farther between. I'll be there tomorrow, Lucy promised. After she hung up, she put the bracelet back on and lay down, staring at the ceiling. In 3 days, she'd know if her entire life had been built on a lie. If the woman she'd called mother had been hiding a terrible truth. If she was someone else entirely, the thought should have terrified her. Instead, it felt almost like relief, because somewhere deep down, Lucy had always known she didn't quite fit in her own life. Like she was wearing someone else's clothes, walking in someone else's shoes. Maybe she was. Maybe she always had been. Outside her window, the Connecticut sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the same colors as the balloons in her dreams. The same colors as the party she couldn't quite remember. 72 hours felt like 72 years. Jonathan barely slept. He'd lie awake in his bed, staring at the ceiling, running through every possible scenario. What would he say if the test came back positive? How did you apologize for 20 years of absence, even if it wasn't your fault? How did you explain to a daughter that you never stopped looking, never stopped hoping, but somehow it hadn't been enough, and if it came back negative, well, he couldn't think about that. Not yet. Emily spent the waiting period shadowing Lucy. Though she tried to be subtle about it, she watched the way Lucy hummed while making breakfast for Olivia, the same melody their mother used to sing. She noticed how Lucy organized the books on the shelf, by color, not by author or title, exactly the way Sophia used to arrange her toys, little things, coincidences, maybe, or echoes of a shared past. On the 3rd day, Marcus Webb called at exactly 2:47 p.m. Jonathan was in his study when his phone rang. Emily was there too. She'd been spending more time with him lately, like they were both afraid to be alone with their thoughts. They looked at each other when they saw Marcus's name on the screen. Put it on speaker, Emily whispered. Jonathan's hand shook as he answered. Marcus. Jonathan. Emily. Marcus's voice was carefully neutral, giving nothing away. The results came back from the lab. The world seemed to stop spinning. Emily grabbed her father's hand, squeezing tight. And Jonathan's voice was barely audible. There was a pause. Just a second. But it felt like falling off a cliff. It's a match, Marcus said quietly. 99.9% probability, Jonathan. Lucy is your daughter. She's Sophia. The phone slipped from Jonathan's hand, clattering onto the desk. He made a sound, something between a laugh and a sob, and his legs gave out. He collapsed into his chair, his face crumpling as 20 years of grief and hope and desperate prayer came pouring out all at once. Dad, Emily breathed, tears streaming down her own face. She'd thought she was prepared for this. had convinced herself she was ready, but nothing could have prepared her for the sheer overwhelming reality of it. Sophia was alive. Her sister, her twin, was alive. "Jonathan, are you there?" Marcus's voice came from the phone, tinny and distant. Emily picked it up with shaking hands. "We're here. Thank you, Marcus. Do you want me to tell her, or—" "No," Jonathan said, pulling himself together with visible effort. He wiped his eyes, his voice thick with emotion. "No, I need to do this. We need to do this." They found Lucy in the garden with Olivia, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Lucy was braiding flowers into the little girl's hair, while Olivia giggled, completely enchanted. When Lucy looked up and saw them approaching, saw their faces, red-rimmed and tear-stained, her smile faded. "What's wrong?" she asked, standing up quickly. "Is it the test? Did something—" "Lucy," Jonathan interrupted, his voice breaking on her name. "Your name isn't Lucy." She froze, her eyes going wide. "It's Sophia," Emily said, moving forward. "You're Sophia Hale. You're my sister, my twin sister." For a moment, Lucy, Sophia, just stared at them. Her face went pale, then flushed, then pale again. She looked down at the bracelet on her wrist, then at Emily's matching one. "The test came back," Jonathan said, taking a step closer. "You're my daughter, the daughter I lost 20 years ago, the daughter I never stopped searching for. I don't—" Sophia's voice was small, childlike. "I don't understand. How is this possible?" "We don't know yet," Emily said, "but we're going to find out. We're going to find out everything." Sophia's legs buckled. Emily caught her, and suddenly they were both on the ground, holding each other, crying. 20 years of separation, of living separate lives, of not knowing the other existed. It all came crashing down in that moment. Jonathan knelt beside them, pulling both his daughters into his arms. Olivia, confused, but sensing something important was happening, wrapped her small arms around all of them, and for the first time in 2 decades, the Hale family was whole. Later that evening, after the tears had dried and the initial shock had settled into a kind of numb disbelief, they sat together in the living room. Sophia was curled up on the couch between Emily and Jonathan, like she was afraid if she moved too far away, they might disappear. "I need to see Mrs. Eleanor," Sophia said suddenly. "She needs to know. She needs to— I don't know what she needs. But I can't just—" "Of course," Jonathan said immediately. "We can go tomorrow, all of us." "She has dementia," Sophia warned. "Some days she doesn't even know who I am." "Doesn't matter. We still need to talk to her, need to understand how—" Jonathan trailed off, the unspoken question hanging heavy in the air. How did a 5-year-old child end up on church steps in Brooklyn on the same day she disappeared from a party in Connecticut? Someone had taken her. Someone had deliberately removed her from her family and deposited her somewhere she'd never be found. The question was, who? Emily saw her father's jaw tighten, saw the way his hands clenched into fists. She knew that look. It was the same expression he wore during hostile business takeovers, when he was planning his attack strategy. Someone had stolen his daughter, and now that she was back, he was going to find out who, and God help them when he did. Across town, Rachel sat in her apartment, staring at her phone. She'd been staring at it for an hour now, waiting for it to ring, waiting for news. Her private investigator had gone silent. Marcus Webb hadn't returned her calls. Jonathan was ignoring her texts, which meant something had happened. Something bad. Her hands were shaking as she poured another glass of wine. Her 4th of the evening. Or was it her 5th? She'd lost count. The logical part of her brain, the part that had built a business empire and navigated corporate politics for decades, was screaming at her to run, to get out while she still could, to disappear before the walls closed in. But where would she go? Everything she'd worked for was here. Everything she was tied to this city, this life, this identity she'd built. And besides, they didn't know. They couldn't know. It had been 20 years. She'd been so careful. There was no evidence, no trail leading back to her. The $5,000 to Mrs. Eleanor had been cash. The car she'd driven that day had been a rental, paid for with a fake ID she'd burned immediately after. She'd worn gloves, a hat, sunglasses. No one had seen her face clearly. She was safe. She had to be safe. Her phone buzzed, and she nearly dropped her wine glass. But it wasn't Jonathan or Marcus or anyone else from the Hale circle. It was her investigator. DNA test came back positive. The babysitter is Sophia Hale. Rachel read the message 3 times before it fully sank in. Then she started laughing. It was a broken, slightly hysterical sound that didn't sound like her at all. Of course the test was positive, because the universe had a sick sense of humor, and Rachel's chickens had finally come home to roost. 20 years. She'd had 20 years of peace. 20 years where she'd almost convinced herself it had all been a bad dream, that she hadn't really done what she'd done. But you couldn't run from the past forever. Eventually, it caught up. Eventually, it came home. Rachel set down her wine glass with exaggerated care and walked to her bedroom. From the back of her closet, behind the designer shoes and expensive handbags, she pulled out a small lockbox. Inside was everything she'd need if she had to disappear. Cash, a fake passport, credit cards under different names. She'd prepared for this possibility years ago. In her more paranoid moments, had told herself she was being ridiculous, that she'd never need any of it. Now she wasn't so sure. Rachel closed the box and put it in her overnight bag, just in case. Then she sat on her bed and tried to think. She could run, should run, probably, but running meant admitting defeat, meant giving up everything. Or she could stay, could fight, could try to control the narrative before it controlled her. 20 years was a long time. Memories faded, evidence disappeared, and Rachel had always been very, very good at making people believe what she wanted them to believe. Maybe, just maybe, she could still get out of this. She just had to be smarter than everyone else, and that had never been a problem before. The news should have stayed private. Jonathan had been explicit about that. No press releases, no announcements, nothing until they understood what had happened. But wealthy families in Connecticut were goldfish in a very small bowl, and secrets had a way of leaking. By the end of the week, the whispers had started. Emily first noticed it at the country club. She'd stopped by to pick up some documents her father had left in his locker, and the moment she walked in, conversations died. Women she'd known for years suddenly found their phones fascinating. Men who usually greeted her with hearty handshakes turned away. Then she overheard it, drifting from the ladies' lounge. Can't possibly be real. 20 years and she just happens to show up. Please, it's obviously a con. Emily's blood ran cold. She pushed open the door to find 3 women clustered around the vanity, all wives of her father's business associates. They jumped when they saw her, guilt flashing across their faces. Emily, we were just talking about my sister, Emily finished, her voice icy. I heard. One of them, Patricia Vanderbilt, all bleached teeth and Botox, had the audacity to look sympathetic. Sweetheart, we're just concerned. Your father has been through so much, and if someone is taking advantage, Emily stepped closer. You mean my sister, the one who was kidnapped when she was 5 and grew up in poverty while we had everything. That's who you think is taking advantage. There's no need to be defensive, another woman said, adjusting her tennis bracelet. We're simply saying it's quite convenient. The timing, the DNA test. Those can be manipulated, you know. Get out, Emily said quietly. Excuse me. Get out, all of you, before I say something I won't regret. They left in a huff of designer perfume and indignation, and Emily stood there shaking with rage. How dare they? How dare they reduce Sophia's trauma, her entire life, to some kind of gold-digging scheme? But as she drove home, a small, poisonous seed of doubt planted itself in her mind. Not about Sophia. She knew her sister was real. The DNA didn't lie, but about the timing, about the convenience of it all. Someone had put these ideas out there. Someone was deliberately poisoning the well, and Emily had a pretty good idea who. Rachel's campaign was subtle but effective. She didn't spread the rumors herself. She was far too smart for that. Instead, she had lunch with the right people, asked the right questions with just the right amount of concern in her voice. I'm sure it's nothing, but doesn't it seem odd that she showed up right when Jonathan was at his most vulnerable? After Olivia's mother left, Of course I believe the DNA test. But you know those can be contaminated. There was a case just last year. I just worry about Jonathan. He wants so badly to believe that he's not thinking clearly. The poison spread like wildfire through their social circle. Within days, everyone had an opinion. The consensus was divided. Some people thought it was a miracle. Others thought it was the con job of the century. And Sophia, who'd done nothing but exist, found herself at the center of a media storm she didn't understand. It started with photographers outside the mansion gates, then reporters calling, trying to get interviews. One particularly aggressive journalist from the Hartford Courier managed to corner Sophia at the grocery store, shoving a recorder in her face. Miss Hale? Or should I say Miss Jenkins? How does it feel to suddenly be an heiress? Did you plan this? Or was finding the Hale family just a lucky break? Sophia had frozen, terrified, until the store manager intervened and called security. But the damage was done. That night, her face was all over the local news. Mystery babysitter claims to be missing Hale heir. Truth or elaborate scam? Jonathan was livid. He called lawyers, threatened lawsuits, but the media frenzy had already taken on a life of its own. Every news outlet wanted the story. Every tabloid had their own theory. And through it all, Sophia retreated further into herself. Emily found her sister sitting in the dark in her room one night. Knees pulled up to her chest, looking smaller than ever. "They think I'm lying," Sophia whispered. "Everyone thinks I'm some kind of criminal." Emily sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "They don't know you. They don't know what you've been through. Maybe I should just go. Go back to Brooklyn, back to Mrs. Eleanor, forget any of this happened." "No," Emily's voice was fierce. "You're not going anywhere. You're my sister, you're home, and we don't run from bullies. Even when the bullies might be right." Emily pulled back, shocked. "What? What if I'm making this up?" Sophia's voice broke. "What if I'm so desperate to belong somewhere that I convinced myself the bracelet meant something? What if Mrs. Eleanor made up the whole story and I'm just some random orphan who—" "Stop!" Emily grabbed her sister's face, forcing her to look her in the eyes. "The DNA test doesn't lie. You are Sophia Hale. You are my twin sister, and whoever is spreading these lies is going to regret it." Jonathan was in his study when Emily knocked. He looked up from a pile of financial records, his face haggard. "It's Rachel," Emily said without preamble. "She's behind the rumors." "I know," Emily blinked. "You know, Marcus traced the origin of the first whispers. They all lead back to people Rachel has had lunch with in the past week." He set down his pen, his jaw tight. "She's trying to discredit Sophia, trying to make us doubt her. But why? What does she gain from this?" Jonathan was quiet for a long moment. Rachel has always been territorial, about the company, about our partnership, about me. He looked uncomfortable admitting it. When Sophia disappeared, Rachel stepped up. She became indispensable, and I think, in her mind, she earned a place in this family that she's never officially had. So Sophia's return threatens that. More than threatens. It destroys it. With Sophia back, there's no question about succession, about who inherits what. The board already loves the story. The missing heir returned. It's like something out of a fairy tale. Rachel's position becomes less secure. Emily sank into a chair. "What are we going to do?" "I'm going to confront her tomorrow, and I'm going to make very clear that if she doesn't stop, there will be consequences." But even as he said it, Emily could see the doubt in his eyes. Rachel had been his partner for 15 years. She knew where all the bodies were buried. Both literally and figuratively, she had power that couldn't be easily dismissed. This wasn't going to be a simple conversation. This was going to be war. That same night, while the Hale family plotted their next move, Rachel sat in her apartment with her own investigator, reviewing files. "Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins is in advanced stages of dementia," the investigator reported. "She's in a care facility in Brooklyn. Some days she's lucid, other days she doesn't recognize her own reflection." "Perfect," Rachel murmured. "Perfect. If she can't remember things clearly, then her testimony about how she got Sophia is unreliable. It's hearsay at best." The investigator shifted uncomfortably. "Mrs. Monroe, what exactly are you trying to accomplish here?" Rachel looked up sharply. "I'm protecting my interests. Is that a problem?" No, ma'am, it's just, the girl has been through a lot, and if she really is Sophia Hale, then she should be grateful to have lived a quiet, simple life instead of growing up in a fishbowl. Rachel's voice was cold. Do you have anything else? The investigator handed her another file. Bank records for Eleanor Jenkins. That $5,000 deposit from October 2005. It's the only large cash deposit she's ever received, before or since. Rachel's hands tightened on the folder. There it was, in black and white, evidence of her payment, but it was cash, untraceable, and the only other person who knew about it was dying by degrees in a nursing home. Destroy this, she said, handing back the file. Ma'am, you heard me. Delete the digital copies. Shred the physical ones. This conversation never happened. The investigator hesitated, then nodded. Money talked, and Rachel was paying well. After he left, Rachel poured herself a drink and stood by the window, looking out over the city lights. She'd come too far to lose everything now. She'd sacrificed too much, made too many difficult choices. If Jonathan wanted to believe in fairy tales, that was his problem. But Rachel dealt in reality, in power, in control, and she wasn't going to let a ghost from the past take away everything she'd built. Even if it meant burning down the whole world to keep her secrets safe. The Sunrise Care facility in Brooklyn was nothing like the Hale mansion. The linoleum floors were clean but worn, the walls painted in that particular shade of institutional beige that seemed designed to be forgettable. The smell of antiseptic mixed with cafeteria food hung in the air, and somewhere down the hall, a television played too loudly. Sophia led the way through the corridors with the familiarity of someone who'd made this trip 100 times before. Jonathan and Emily followed, both of them quiet, taking in this glimpse of the life their daughter and sister had lived for 20 years. She's in room 247, Sophia said softly, pausing outside a door decorated with hand-drawn flowers and a name card that read, Eleanor Jenkins. I need to warn you, she might not understand who you are, or even who I am. It depends on the day. We understand, Jonathan said, though Emily could see his hands trembling slightly. Sophia knocked gently and pushed open the door. Mrs. Eleanor sat in a wheelchair by the window, her silver hair neatly braided, her hands folded in her lap. She was smaller than Emily had imagined, fragile-looking, like a strong breeze might carry her away. But when she looked up and saw Sophia, her face lit up with genuine joy. Lucy, my sweet girl, you came. Sophia crossed the room and knelt beside the wheelchair, taking the old woman's hands in hers. Hi, Mama, I brought some people to meet you. Mrs. Eleanor's eyes drifted to Jonathan and Emily, curious but not alarmed. Friends of yours. Actually, Sophia's voice caught. Mama, these are the Hales. Jonathan and Emily Hale. For a moment, there was no recognition. Then something shifted in Mrs. Eleanor's expression. A flicker of awareness, of memory struggling to surface. Hale, she repeated slowly. That name, I know that name. Jonathan stepped forward carefully, like he was approaching a spooked animal. Mrs. Jenkins, we need to ask you some questions about the day you found Lucy, October 15th, 2005. Mrs. Eleanor's hands started to shake. That day, that terrible day. What do you remember? Emily asked gently. The old woman's eyes went distant, looking at something none of them could see. I was going to church, early morning, before the sun was properly up. I liked to pray when it was quiet, before the world got too loud. She paused, her breathing shallow. And there she was, just sitting on the steps, this tiny little thing in a dirty dress, crying like her heart was breaking. Sophia squeezed her hands. What happened then, Mama? I waited. Thought maybe someone had just stepped away for a moment, would come back for her, but nobody came. An hour passed, then two. Mrs. Eleanor's voice dropped to barely a whisper, and then the car pulled up. Jonathan went very still. What car? Expensive. Black. I remember thinking it looked out of place in our neighborhood. Mrs. Eleanor's eyes focused on Jonathan suddenly, sharp and clear, despite the fog of dementia. A woman got out, well-dressed, elegant. She saw me with the child and walked right up like she owned the world. Emily's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. What did she say? Jonathan asked. She said the child was abandoned, that she'd been trying to find someone to take her, but didn't trust the system. Said foster care would eat her alive. Mrs. Eleanor's voice grew bitter. She said if I took the girl, raised her, there would be money. $5,000. Cash. Right there. And you took it, Jonathan said. But there was no judgment in his voice. Just exhaustion. I was a widow living on a seamstress's pension. My own daughter had died before she could take her first breath. And here was this beautiful child who needed someone. Mrs. Eleanor started to cry, tears running down her weathered cheeks. I told myself I was saving her, that whatever had happened, wherever she came from, she was better off with someone who would love her than in some government facility. Sophia was crying too now, her head pressed against Mrs. Eleanor's knee. Did the woman tell you her name? Emily managed to ask. No, but I remember her jewelry. She was wearing this ring, emerald, big as a marble. Caught the light when she handed me the money. Mrs. Eleanor looked at Sophia with something like desperation. I loved you, Lucy. I loved you like you were my own. Please tell me you know that. I know, Mama, Sophia whispered. I know. Jonathan turned away, his shoulders shaking. Emily went to him, putting a hand on his arm. They both knew what this meant. Someone hadn't just taken Sophia. They'd planned it, executed it, paid to make sure she disappeared completely. Mrs. Jenkins, Jonathan said, turning back with effort. Can you describe the woman in more detail? Anything you remember? Her age, her height, her face. Mrs. Eleanor's moment of clarity was fading. Her eyes went vague again, confused. Woman? What woman, Lucy? Who are these people? It's okay, Mama, Sophia soothed. They're friends. Just rest now. But Jonathan couldn't let it go. The ring. You said it was an emerald. Are you sure? Green? Mrs. Eleanor said, her voice slurred with exhaustion or medication, or the fog of her disease. Big and green, and it sparkled. She kept gesturing with that hand, like she wanted me to see it, like it was important. Emily felt something cold settle in her stomach. An emerald ring, a woman of means, someone who could navigate both worlds, the wealth of Connecticut and the poverty of Brooklyn, someone who had access to the Hale family, someone who knew about Sophia. We need to go, Jonathan said abruptly. He looked at Sophia. Now, we need to go now. Dad? Emily followed him into the hallway. What is it? What's wrong? Jonathan was pulling out his phone, already dialing Marcus. I need you to pull security footage from my office, he barked when the investigator answered. Every business meeting, every dinner, every event from the last 20 years. I need to see who was wearing an emerald ring. Jonathan, just do it. And pull Rachel Monroe's financial records from October 2005. Everything. I don't care if you have to hack into the IRS. He hung up and leaned against the wall, his face ashen. Emily's mind was racing, putting pieces together. Rachel had been at the party that day. She'd been there when Sophia disappeared. She'd had access to the family, to the house, to everything. And she always wore that ring, that distinctive emerald ring she claimed was from her first big commission, bought to celebrate her success. It can't be, Emily breathed. Rachel wouldn't. She couldn't. But even as she said it, she remembered the rumors Rachel had spread, the desperation in her eyes when she'd warned Emily about Sophia, the way she'd fought so hard to discredit a DNA test that was irrefutable. Not the actions of someone concerned for the family, the actions of someone protecting herself. Sophia emerged from Mrs. Eleanor's room, her eyes red. She's sleeping now. The nurse said she probably won't remember we were here. She looked between them. What's happening? You both look like you've seen a ghost. Not a ghost, Jonathan said grimly. A monster. He took both his daughter's hands, holding tight like he was afraid they might disappear again. We're going home. And when we get there, we're going to end this, once and for all. The drive back to Connecticut was silent, except for the sound of Jonathan's phone buzzing constantly with updates from Marcus. By the time they pulled through the mansion gates, the investigator had sent through preliminary findings. Financial records showing a large cash withdrawal from one of Rachel's personal accounts on October 14, 2005, the day before Sophia disappeared. Security footage from a business dinner in 2008, clearly showing Rachel wearing an emerald ring. Testimony from the Hale family's former driver, who remembered taking Rachel to Brooklyn once around that time. though he couldn't remember the exact date. Piece by piece, the puzzle was coming together, and the picture it revealed was damning. Jonathan pulled into the driveway and sat for a moment, staring at the house where his daughter had been stolen from him 20 years ago. "Tomorrow," he said quietly. "Tomorrow we confront her, and she's going to tell us everything." Emily nodded, her jaw set. Sophia just looked scared, but beneath the fear, there was something else, something harder. Justice, finally, was coming, and Rachel Monroe was about to discover that some sins, no matter how carefully buried, eventually claw their way back to the surface. Rachel arrived at the mansion at exactly 10 o'clock the next morning, summoned by a curt text from Jonathan that had simply read, "My office, 10 a.m., non-negotiable." She'd dressed carefully for this meeting. A navy power suit, her hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, minimal jewelry except for the emerald ring she always wore. Her armor, the uniform she'd cultivated over 15 years of fighting her way through corporate America. But when she walked into Jonathan's study and saw who was waiting, she knew immediately that something had shifted. Jonathan sat behind his desk, flanked by Marcus Webb